This is such fascinating work, and I'm super excited to get a chance to talk to you about this. First of all, let's talk about super basic premise of anxiety and depression. Okay? Yes, we can have physical causes, and oftentimes we do. Things that are barriers to our body's ability to function normally. Barriers that we can identify on labs, and then we can address it and we can get rid of those barriers. Right. But we also want to look at anxiety and depression as, anxiety is typically when people are worried about their future. They're not living in the present. They're thinking about the future. They're anxious about, what happens if my job, with my job, if this, what's going to happen in the future with my child with this, or what's going to, it's always like future thinking. Where depression very much tends to be people who are living in the past. I just wanted to kind of bring that to the forefront. Most people living with anxiety and or depression are living in the future and or the past, and they're not living in the present moment. Why is that? It's because of trauma. Everyone has trauma, 100% of us do. And what's really important is for us to understand what trauma really is. Trauma is not the event itself. Now, it can be described that way and has been described like that in the past. What the trauma experts of today say that trauma is that trauma is not the event itself. It's our perception of that event and the story that we created around that event that ultimately changed our perception of ourselves, of how we see ourselves and the world around us. And trauma, because it's not the event itself, because it's our perception, that leads to emotion and thought processes that literally get stuck inside of our bodies and can end up ultimately causing disease of every kind. It can manifest into disease. In fact, studies show that children who have experienced a lot of trauma. So there is a test called the Adverse Childhood Experiences test, and it's a 10-question test. And the studies show that people who score a 7 or above are at a much higher risk of developing chronic disease in adulthood, including mental health disorders. Why is that? It's because they've been living with unresolved trauma and unprocessed emotions since their childhood, and that causes stress and chemical changes in our body that are damaging over the course of time that ultimately lead to disease and mental health issues.
Yeah, my sister's in this field, and she refers to the ACE test as the most important test that you've never heard of, the Adverse Childhood Experiences score. And, a high score predicts not only it predicts cancer, it predicts your chances of being in jail, it predicts all these things. That was part of the awakening. I'm looking at, I do have trauma. So once somebody, and by the way, I think you can look that up online, the ACE test,
yes.
and take this test for yourself. It's a profoundly important thing for people to do. Once you discover that you have trauma, now what do you do with this?
The good news is that there are some amazing tools and modalities that can be used to overcome trauma that were not available to us or really not known to us 10 to 15 years ago. Before we get into that, I just want to mention, for anybody who sees this, who goes online and takes their ACEs score, please understand that just because you score a 6 or 7 or higher doesn't mean that you're going to have those issues. It means you can fix it. You can fix it. So just because you have a high score doesn't mean, and even if you have a high score and you're already noticing that you are sick, it doesn't mean that you can't reverse that and that you can't fix that. And that's what we're getting ready to talk about, because that's the good news.
Thank you for saying that.
That's the good news here, is that this stuff is fixable. There are so many tools and modalities out there now, and with these tools and modalities, people are learning that they don't have to go back into their trauma and re-experience it again. Like, they don't have to re-experience the events in order to heal. Those were the old ways of doing it. You know, when you would go talk to your talk therapist or your psychotherapist, and I'm not saying that there's not a time and a place for that. Of course there is. But more times than not, it does more damage than it does good.